you know, there's not always necessarily a lot of people on live. We never know. There can be 5, there can be 50, but because it's being recorded, a lot of people pick up and want to observe this afterwards.
No worries.
I know. Let me say before we kick off to everybody who is joining, what is I'd like to say to anybody and everybody, this for me is a real treat being able to talk to you, Sophie. And I would like other people to have the opportunity of asking you questions if they feel that they'd like to, because you have had an amazing impact as a leader in the changes that you've brought into your organization. I mean, you are an absolute living, breathing example of what leadership's all about. And I'm sure there are some people who'd be really interested in some things that I wouldn't think to ask you. I don't even know what the heck I'm going to ask you. We're just going to have a conversation. But I think it's important that anybody who's listening knows that if you want to ask Sophie a question, please just type it up. It does mean that I'll have to keep peering, but
Sorry, I've got my glasses on too today, Pen. Just so that I look credible, though.
So please, anybody who's listening, do grab the opportunity while I'm talking to Sophie to be just put up your questions. So let me now just kick off by saying, Sophie, I'm not good at time. How many years ago did I meet you?
6. So it was 6 years ago next week that I did the program, actually, did the leadership program myself with my team.
Well,
the day two with Peter this time ago, 6 years ago.
Wow. And I remember when you and I spoke the very first time, I think there was a possibility at that time that Paul Stobart was going to come and work with you, and you wanted to talk a little bit about that and find out about him and so on. And we had a fantastic conversation, a thoroughly good conversation, and you decided to have Paul work with you. And I have to say, watching over a very short space of time, the changes that you made in that company was nothing short of truly amazing. And Paul still will talk about it. And I think it would be really useful for everybody if you could just go back to that time and talk about, first of all, how you really got your understanding of leadership and the extraordinary and incredibly fast difference you made to a company that was, well, let's put it politely, in trouble. So tell people about you.
I would be less diplomatic about it. I was talking to a bunch of team members yesterday, actually, and I said, let's not forget that 6 years ago, this business was on its knees. It was downtrodden, broken, old, underinvested. So I would be a little bit more brutal than that, Pen. And I think the question that our shareholders were sort of asking me is, you know, we've got to catch the knife, Sophie, which is a horrible phrase. Catch the knife. It's a very corporate phrase. But anyway, yes, that was the situation. So let's rewind 6 years ago. So you're right. Yeah, I'd forgotten that effectively we first met because I was trying to get the down low on Mr. Stobart, that wonderful human. And I just arrived as chief executive. And one of my requests of the shareholders of this glorious business was, look, I'm going to need a chairman. And I need that particular chairman to be exactly right for me. And so I'd like to go shopping for a chairman, please. And I was very blessed in that they said, yes, of course, you can go shopping for your own chairman. Because usually what happens with majority shareholders is they want to put their own chairperson in so they can keep a good eye on management. And so to their credit, we had the discussion about, right, this is my first chief executive gig. You don't know what to do with the business. You think I do. But in order to be most successful, I need a chairman. And I went to a lovely headhunter called Peter Neal in the Northeast, and he found lovely Paul for me, and me and Paul went for a coffee. And I was trying to explain to Paul what the difficulty I could see at Total Fitness was, and bearing in mind I'd only been in post a couple of weeks. And I described to him what I described as a sort of typical overmanaged business, where the culture was very sort of tell and push, and it was extremely high churn, extremely disengaged. And over time of sort of excessive amounts of sort of tell and push, the people who I met were still really quite proud, locally proud. They didn't have a relationship to the organisation overall, but they were locally proud. But when you ask them questions about, oh, why do we do things this way, and what would you do, and can you explain this to me, and just some really sort of rich questions about why things were the way they are, they didn't have a clue, and they lost all ability and or confidence to think and make decisions. And so I described that to Paul as overmanaged, classically overmanaged. I think that's the problem. And he re-articulated it to me, or summarised, in the context of the integral performance model, which is one of the first models of the leadership programme. And so it was new words to me, but it really resonated. And I went, he knows what I'm trying to say. He understands. This is great. And as we finished the conversation, and it's so lovely, and I won't even try to do his accent, he said, well, I'd love to work with you, but if I don't, that's no problem at all. But you need to go and meet this particular lady, Penny. I thought, well, that's helpful because I need a reference on you to convince North Edge. And that was how we met. He said, you need to go and meet Penny anyway, because there is a leadership program that addresses some of the classically overmanaged challenges that you've got there. And that was how I met Paul. That was how I met you. And that was what I arrived to. And the final thing I'll say, just in terms of how we came to meet, is that you mentioned earlier in your very humbling intro, and my little voice inside my head was going, oh, stop it, you big tummy tickler. You big tummy tickler. That yes, this business today is night and day different to the way it was 6 years ago, and it was very different within a year. But what I would say is there's been an enormous amount of change with the same people. So my leadership team are the same team that I arrived with on day one, with the exception of one role. And I think that is testament to the power of leadership. Is just about unlocking potential that is already embedded in an organisation, because everybody's got the capability to do it. And I think that is sort of the wonderful thing about Total Fitness. We've entirely transformed the business with the same people in it. Whereas, and it's a useful point of reference for me, because when I arrived in post, I went for a long chat with the outgoing CEO. We went and met in a hotel in York on a glorious sunny day. And I said to him, all I want to do, it was almost like a handover debriefing meeting. And it was a bit sort of odd. So I just sort of framed it really neatly for him, so it was easy. I said, all I want to know, can you just tell me about all the people? I want to understand the senior leadership team, please, and the general managers out in the health clubs. And all I heard, it was terrible. It was like 2 hours of just tearing them to shreds. It was absolutely awful. I kind of thought, how is this okay under anybody's tenure? And he didn't tear it to shreds. He tore the culture to shreds, and I thought it was a really useful meeting, but I did have to suspend all of that in my mind and go, I'm sure this isn't the case. Nobody gets out of bed to do a bad job, and nobody gets out of bed in the morning with the intent of poking other people in the eyes and annoying them. So I still to this day reflect back and go, that's astonishing. Those same people had loads of potential. We just had to unlock it through what I now understand to be the power of leadership, but I didn't know it at the time.
Do you know, I find that, I don't think I've ever heard you talk about that meeting that you had with the departing CEO before. I find that seriously scary, that somebody can have no perception whatsoever that the way that people are behaving further down the organization is largely to do with their own behavior at the top. I find that find that scary and very, very sad. And I've got to say, that's one hell of an accolade to you. You know, you didn't go in and get rid of all those people because of what you've heard. You've only lost one on the top team. And all you've done is just continue to develop the people that were there. So, Sophie, talk through a little bit. What are the things that you think you did that created that turnaround? What is it that you actually did? Because that's a hell of a turnaround.
It is, and I do pinch myself. I really do pinch myself because as a chief executive, you're one of your many jobs, and there's three sets of customers that you have, or three sets of stakeholders that you have to traverse and build a strategy that makes a promise and delivers a promise to all three. First and foremost, it's your team. Secondly, it's your customers, and thirdly, as a chief executive, it's your shareholders. And so one of the bits of the chief executive job is always talking to the investment community. So you always have to do your own tummy tickle. So you've got to sell the dream. And I find it uncomfortable, but it is also a really good moment of reflection in terms of what we've achieved, because 6 years later, irrespective of a 2-year interruption with a pandemic that completely flattens the industry. I mean, it really did. Our industry was one of the worst hits. It was terrible. But if we just hold that in our minds and think about this, there are many measures of success. But our EBITDA, which is one measure of success, is 6 times what it was 6 years ago. 6 times. Now, it was low to start with, but it doesn't matter. It's 6 times what it was. And that includes a tripling of energy prices, all sorts of inflationary costs baked in, people costs, supply chain costs that have been going up with the inflationary environment, and losing 30% of your business overnight in COVID, and then having to rebuild it. So I have to acknowledge the team for that, because they've climbed this mountain 3 times now. We turned the business around and climbed the mountain. We had it killed with COVID, and we did it again. And then we got locked down again, and then we did it again. And the final path to the top of the mountain has been pretty twisty, because we've had all of those other crises that I mentioned. So we have done something really incredibly special. And then what did we do? I also have to ask myself that, because it's been a long journey. What did we actually do? Because what it hasn't been is spent an awful lot of money. And what it hasn't been is opened a load of new business units, which are 2 of the usual paths to growth. One of the other paths to growth is to do interesting stuff with the back office through either efficiency or some sort of tax change. And we haven't done that either. It's purely been on top line growth, engagement, culture, and then some strategy. So it's definitely not one thing. It's certainly not one of the usual simple levers that you'll pull as a chief executive. It's been a number of things, but then the other thing that is quite unique is me. But I would say me, not in the case of it's all about me in the case of this is my first ever time as chief executive. And I think there is a beauty in a first time leadership role in that you bring quite a lot of helpful naivety to it, or healthy naivety to it. In that one of the first things I did on day one was go, well, the owners and the shareholders thought that I had all the answers, and that's why I got the job. I fucking didn't. I wrote a 100-day plan knowing that it would go out the window. But you write a 100-day plan that tickles their tummies in order to get the job right. And then you get into the mix of it, and you just know that, you're going to pick up stones and find new things, and it's all going to go to hell in a handcart. And so one of the first things I did with a bit of healthy naivety is just level with everybody and say, so this is my first time out and I don't know what to do. Wow. Not quite in that way, but I was very clear that, look, I'm new to the business. I've got an awful lot of experience. However, this is an entirely new challenge, and it's new because it's a new set of people. And so I don't have all of the answers, but what I do know are all of the questions. And the other thing I know is that there will be an awful lot of positive intent in this business to help us answer those questions over the course of time. And all I could do was be clear about what the questions were. And they were 3 or 4 questions. And I think that was a really helpful start point. Now, on reflection, and, you know, when you read literature on sort of leadership and what have you, words are used to describe that as, you know, oh, it's being vulnerable and it's being transparent and all of that good stuff. That actually wasn't in my mind at all. It was just honesty and a bit of healthy naivety. And to an extent, Pen, if I'm really honest, setting the expectations fairly low because I didn't know I could do it. And she's going, do you know what? I need to be up. If I say I've got all the answers and I know what to do, that might make everybody feel really comfortable. But what if I can't do it? So let's set the expectations quite low and be very clear about what I know and what I don't. And then if it does all go wrong, then that's okay, because I haven't set myself up for failure. So that's a bit honest as well. But on reflection, that is effectively what I was doing. So number 1, just be clear that it's very urgent, but I don't know all the answers. And then number 2, given that there was all of this sort of cultural difficulty, number 2 was, well, Sophie, you're actually going to have to lean into the role of leader here, because these people need it. And I don't know anything about leadership and I don't know anything about culture. I just know how to, on paper, turn businesses around. I've done it a few times, but I know what the toolkit looks like. So let's throw that out the window, because I can't tell people what to do and then they believe it. It's going to be a team effort. I better go to leadership school because I'm really unconfident here. All of a sudden, I've got a team of people looking at me, and the job that I'd done previously, while it was an international director role, I was a lone wolf. I was the roving reporter that would travel around the world and set up transactions and some corporate boring stuff that I won't bore anybody with. But I was honest enough to say I have led small teams, but not an entire organization. So I better go to leadership school and find out. And I took my team with me as well. So the second thing was to help me understand the leadership team and whether or not they bought into the idea of sort of cultural transformation and their role in it and their responsibility in it. Can they lean into it? And all of them did, with the exception of one. And so that was step number 2, if you like. And we did that, as I said earlier, 6 years ago next week.
Who did you do it with?
Peter.
Oh, did you? Yeah.
Yeah. And I still tell stories about Peter, actually, because one of our regional managers was doing a leadership program. He's one of our master trainers, trained, I think, by Christine, lovely Christine. He was delivering a program to a whole group of people upstairs. And we've been at this for so long that now we're right down on the front line of the organisation. So there was lifeguards, there was some heads of department, there was somebody new to TF support in IT, real mixed bag. But I'll usually pop in on either day 3 or the start of day 2, just to say hello. And particularly on day 2, I'll talk to them about, what really resonated yesterday and what have you. And largely communicating behaviours tends to come up. And so I'll tell them the story of Peter taking me to task on my communicating behaviour. And he did it in such a way. I used a lot of red behaviour. And I have no excuses about it. I used a lot of red behaviour. And I will talk to the delegates about why is it that we use red behaviour, and we unpack that, and also the different sorts of red behaviour, because it's far more nuanced than just interrupting, far more nuanced. There's all sorts of body language plays, all sorts of other plays that include not talking. So not talking is also red behaviour, because that's my passive aggressive one that I do at home with my family. So, and we talk about all of that. And so I tell the story of Peter and how he took me to task. And he said, I can remember saying to him, oh, but Peter, I'm really enthusiastic and I'm trying to encourage them. I want to show that I'm in there with them. And, I'm really interested. When I sort of interrupt or finish people's sentences, I'll go, yeah, oh, yeah. I said, I'm just all these wonderful things. And he said, but Sophie, is it red behavior? I said, but no, because it's this and this and this. And I, at one point, he leaned forward in his chair and he pulled his glasses down his nose and he said, yes, Sophie, and who is that about? And I went, it's all about me, Peter. And he said, yes, it's all about you. And I went, oh. We still laugh about that today. Anyway, I don't know how we got there, Penny, but yes, Peter did my PLP.
Out of curiosity, what made you decide to become a trainee yourself of the program?
Well, it was by far the toughest thing I've ever done in my career. I should say that, because I remember rocking up on day one and going, oh my God, I've never stood in front of a flip chart before. How do I do this? I can't even write in a straight line on one. It just does this. And the wonderful Jill Matley, who's one of the PLP trainers for another local company, an internet and telecoms business. I think you might know her. She was in my CTP and she turned up with all these flip charts. And I was like, oh God, I've listened to Penny's stuff and I've read the books and I think I know what I'm doing. Oh God, there's all these professional trainers. Anyway, that's just a comedy story about my day one, and I'll tell you another one in a minute. But why did I decide to do it? Because I just thought this is such a big piece of the unlocking of the potential of total fitness that, well, it's my job, isn't it? And I think over the winter time, after I'd done the leadership program and some of our senior management went through it too, I thought, Sophie, you don't actually have a job description because nobody gives you a job description when you're a private equity chief executive. You just get your agreement with the shareholders that has one line in it that says you're duty bound to fulfill the obligations of the chief executive officer, which isn't really a job description. And you can't really find one that's pertinent. So I thought, well, I'm going to write mine. And it's 2 sentences. And the first sentence is to build and uphold the leadership culture. And number 2 is build and deliver the growth strategy. So it's really, really that simple. And I kind of went, Sophie, if that is sentence number 1, well, build and uphold the leadership culture, then, well, that's what you should do. How can you do that? Well, you'll need to understand these principles and really you should practice them because it's not one and done, it's practice. It's never try, it's never do, it's practice. So if you've got to practice it, you better really learn it inside and out. It's pointless preaching without practicing. So go do it. And it was extremely tough. And actually, my second comedy story, and Tash has probably told you this as well. Tash was my trainer. I did day 1. Turned up on day 1. Delivered some of the models very badly, and was so. I felt so dejected with myself, and so ashamed of myself because I couldn't do it first time. Which is, it's just one of my limiting beliefs. If I can't do something first time, I shouldn't do it at all. And I turned up on day 2. I met Tash at the door. I texted her beforehand and said, can you just come meet me? And I said, Tash, I don't think I can do it. And I'm stealing the opportunity from somebody else. I just don't think I'm good enough. And she was really good with me. She listened. She said, well, why not just stay? Just stay for day 2. Let's see how we go at the end. I said, I don't know. I feel so overfaced. There's just so much stuff and I can't structure it in my head yet. I just feel overwhelmed. Anyway, by the end of day 2, I'd met a friend for life in Jill Matley. I felt really loved and really supported. I'd practiced and failed on multiple occasions, but my development from the start of that day to the end of that day with a slightly different mindset was stellar. And I'm just so glad I did it, because it's just entirely changed the way that I work and I lead in such a way that we seem to have created a culture where I'm extremely comfortable. And when you're extremely comfortable, when I say comfortable, I don't mean, I don't sit all day and drink martinis. We work really hard, but I'm extremely comfortable in that. I'm just extremely comfortable. So what's that? That is just feeling not vulnerable, not overlooked, not just fully myself. I think let's just cut to the chase, Sophie, and stop trying to find the right words. I just feel fully myself, which is lovely. And if I'm feeling engaged and fully myself, then I can get that from my team members as well, who can then deliver that down to their team members as well. So it's been game changing.
So, I mean, it is utterly amazing what you've achieved. And I know Paul Stobart thinks the sun shines out of every orifice. He thinks you're utterly amazing. But just to give people who are going to be listening to this, just give people an idea of actually, if you can remember off the top of your head, the sort of figures and numbers, exactly where you were in terms of whatever numbers you like to use, turnover of people, lost, but whatever it happens to be, to where you are now.
So as I said earlier, one of the measures of success, blah, 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 EBITDA, it's usually the one that gets talked about. The lead measures of success for that eventual output are all of your people measures. And in order to make the case for change at TF, particularly with shareholders like numbers. They will often, talk about people and the power of people, but when it comes down to it, they often can't grasp it. And that's not about them, and it's no criticism of them. It's just shareholders are far away from the business, aren't they? They're far away from the front line. And so it's quite tough for them to grasp. And making the case and the case that I was making to my shareholders, to be clear, was it was helpful that my first point to them was, can you not give me any money right now? So that's a vote winner. Like, don't give me any money right now. I'll come back for it, though. So hold that thought. And also, stay out of my way. Just stay out of the way. I need a long runway to turn this ship around. And I also don't know how long it's going to take. But what I do need is for you to step off. Just be less active. Because this is going to be people transformation. It's going to take a long time because it's behavior change across an entire organization. Leave me alone. They don't like that. And so in order to make that case, I did what I call the people bridge. And I got all across the data, because that's what they like when you're making a case for change. Got all across the data. And I said, right. So I've got all of these inputs like average tenure of role, churn rate, critically, what's your engagement rate? So your employee net promoter score, which is your 101 measure of whether you're going to be able to do anything within an organization. Are your people actually engaged? And then there's all sorts of other little questions that you can have in there about, trust ratings in an organization, connection to the strategy, belief and confidence in the leadership team. Do I feel like my team have my back? My manager cares about me? There's all of these other inputs. So I had a good look around them and I went, right, let's make a simple equation here. So on the left-hand side, which might look like the right-hand side because of the way the camera is, but one side to the other of the bridge, I said, here's my number of full-time employees. And it was about 700. Head count of about 900, but full-time equivalents about 700. And I said, right, okay, if we assume that somebody that is less than 3 months into role is 10% effective in role, and if we assume that somebody that's been in role for 3 to 6 months is 40 or 50% effective in role, And only when you get to a year old in your role are you anywhere near 100% effective. So let's apply that to the number based on how long of all of the FTEs been in role. And I calculated that from these 700 FTEs, my number of effective employees looked like this. I'll get to the punchline in a minute. And then I said, okay, so what's my engagement level of those people? And we measured employee engagement. Employee engagement came out at -13, which I didn't think they could go below 0, but apparently they can. And I sort of went, right, well, that's a train of trash. And so generally speaking, something around about 10 is good. Something around about 20 is very good, 30 excellent, 50 world class. -13. So my level of disengaged people and therefore drags and detractors was extremely high. And so I said, right, my number of effective people based on tenure is this much. Let's take off. I didn't know what to take off, but let's just assume that a -13 ENPS has a 13% drag on effectiveness. Yeah. Okay, so that reduces it even further. And then I said, okay, so we know that there's no clear strategic direction, and I did a bit of research on, what that impact can have on a workforce, and generally it's anywhere between a 10 and 50% effect on your workforce. Let's give it the best case scenario. Let's take off 10%. So another 10% off my effective workforce. And I said, well, when you've got a disengaged workforce, that's a drag on the engaged people because the disengaged drag them down. So let's take another amount off, and we calculated what that amount should be. And then I said, and finally, the people that are really fresh in role, that have only been around for 0 to 3 months, they create another drag on the rest of the workforce because they're having to train them and all of that good stuff. So let's take that off. Right. The punchline of all of that maths was that I had a 50% effective workforce. So from my 700, you could say that 350 of my team members were effective in role. And then I applied that to my total payroll bill, which is in the tens of millions of pounds. And so my case to my shareholders was, at the moment, I am wasting this many £1 million every single year purely on the fact that the culture is broken. So please, if you want me to return the payroll bill in investment, then leave me alone. Wow. And I think that was a really important point for sort of getting buy-in and the ability to just crack on. But that to answer your question, Pen, what sort of state were you in? That was the state that I was in. A workforce that had a very high vacancy rate. Usually there was about 10% vacancies at any one time. They were churning, and therefore we had a high proportion of people that were not a year old in role. They were disengaged, they were unaligned, and the detractors were creating a drag on the rest of them. So yeah, it was a merry old mess.
So now how did you turn it, and what did you turn it to?
So we haven't had an ENPS score of lower than 40 for about 5 years now. So there was an immediate uptick in employee engagement score from -13 to +9, quite quickly, actually, within about 6 months. And I can't say, I can't say it was down to one thing, but what I think it was some fresh direction and energy and belief. These people have been told that, it couldn't be done and that they were the problem. And so I think a fresh approach to leadership and a bit of belief but it wasn't belief in the future. It was just belief in them, I think was really helpful. Loads of clear communication, loads of it. And about what I knew and what I didn't know, as I said earlier, but loads of clear communication. But then importantly, a very clear and articulated commitment, even if I didn't know what the plan was, commitment to developing and investing in the people themselves. not in other stuff. So, you know, the clubs are in a right sorry state, but a clear and committed investment in the people themselves. And immediately that was like a big tick. And then slowly but surely over the next year, by the end of 2019, it was, I can remember when I received the score, actually, I was sitting in Starbucks in Manchester waiting to go to a fairly scary meeting. And I got the text from Andrea to tell me that ENPS was 42.
Wow.
From 13 to 9 to 42. And within that year, what else we'd done was get a load of trainers trained and really sort of start to roll out some investment in people and culture, with the PLP being one of the foundational pillar of it. We'd set a much clearer strategic direction. And you know what? We just got on with the job of dealing with things that were pissing people off. And funnily enough, we started to turn performance around and the teams felt that they were winning again. So, that's the first year of the turn, effectively.
It was amazing, Sophie, what you did. I know Paul, who was your chairman, he still is your chairman, isn't he?
Yes,
lovely Paul. He was just blown away by what you've achieved. He's talked about it on numerous occasions. He thinks what you achieved is nothing short of miraculous. Utterly amazing. So if you were a CEO going into a new role, what are the key things that you would say to that individual? In fact, think about it a bit differently. You went in as CEO into a company that was evidently in trouble. Think about it this way. If you were going into any company in a senior role, okay, so not necessarily the CEO, it could be as a senior manager with a team and a small division underneath you. What are the key things that you would say to them is critical for them to then begin to get real success wherever they are, whatever the industry, but going in? What do you think are the key things? Because what you achieved was exceptional.
Okay, that is an interesting question, and it's not one that I've got a very considered and structured answer to. So I'll just ramble and we'll see if it makes sense. So if I was sitting with somebody today in my mind's eye who was about to approach a senior role, some of the things I would say, and all of them would probably be outside of sort of technical functional stuff, would be: number one, you must commit integrally and visibly, so internally and externally, to a path of growth, personal growth. Because if you aren't committed to your own growth, then you don't really have the right to lead other people, because your role is to grow other people around you, and they can't if you're not. That's probably number one. And then number two, make it abundantly clear, because this is really misunderstood, to your team. And when I say make it abundantly clear, I don't mean tell them. There's an art to making things clear without telling people stuff. But you've got to make it abundantly clear that the first priority of any team member is to the team. And investing time as a team in becoming a team in its truest sense is exceptionally important. And then thirdly, as a team, committing to the path of leadership and therefore unlocking the potential of their teams will then create whatever you need to create, be it M&A growth, core growth, whatever you need to deliver strategically. Unless you've committed to the path of growth yourself, built and formed a great team who are then committed to the practice of leadership and therefore growing other people around them, you can't really do anything, because you haven't really started to turn the flywheel of growth and momentum. That was actually not a bad answer, I think.
No question. Sophie, one of the things you are, I know we've had 2 or 3 like this, Paul being one, Nigel Parkinson another. We've had a few, but you're very much in the minority of CEOs who've elected to put yourself through the I call the masterclass, but it's now the certified training program that you found you nearly walked out at the end of day one, that you actually did. How important do you think it is? Because it's unusual to have a CEO at the top doing what you did, which is not just taking it to the next level. So let's think of the 3-day program. You learned this much. It goes to this when you do the certified training program.
Yeah.
How critical do you think it is, or how much do you think it contributed to the fact that you chose to become a trainer and still deliver the odd program? And literally, from just what I heard you said earlier, you still go along when there's a program being run. How important do you think, or how much do you think that's been due to your actual success, saying, I'm doing my best to walk the talk?
I think there's two ways of looking at that under the same umbrella of a leadership role. It's going to sound really trite, and I sort of hate the fact that this phrase has been almost politicized recently in the UK, which is that the chief, or any leadership role, it's a role of service and duty to other people. It's actually not about you at all. Leadership sort of on its head, and I sort of talk about, I hate this phrase of, and I'll always be clear about it when somebody says lead from the front, and I'm like, no, you don't. You lead from the back. It's just not about you. So if we take that a little bit further and think about why the CTP has been so transformational for this organisation, well, number one, it's transformed my leadership practice and knowledge. And you can't serve other people through leadership unless you deeply, deeply understand it to the extent that you are really confident to bring those leadership qualities to bear in your own leadership team. You just can't do it unless you deeply understand it. When I say deeply understand, I mean like feel it to the extent that you can feel when somebody's behavior is not going to create the right environment for other people. Like it becomes such a part of you that it becomes intrinsic and embedded, and really, really part of your whole self. And that's really important, because you just can't get the best out of other people unless you can really feel it and intuit it. There's often times that I can intuit a lack of leadership or an opportunity or somebody with potential, but I can't say why. I can only say I feel it, and I definitely couldn't do that before. And that's important for the service of others. And then secondly, and more obviously, really, is that it's far more believable and authentic if your chief executive is, doing it, thinking about it, can articulate themselves about the frameworks, and then it makes you incredibly accessible is the other important thing to other people. So when I go and pop into one of the programs that we run here at TF, and I can talk to them meaningfully and in my way about these frameworks and bring to life all sorts of stories and examples of the frameworks in action, but from my life, which you can't do unless you've done the training program yourself and actually be a trainer, then it means so much more to them. They sort of, all of the material sort of jumps off the page and sort of out of the program into a living person. And then the final thing is that, and it's a very underrated quality of leadership and one that you just don't see talked about enough, but Kevin Cashman is a book that Peter recommended to me, and he definitely talks about it, is the power of storytelling. And as a leader, you must be able to tell stories that are relevant and meaningful and, create a bit of connection, and really understanding all of the leadership material, and therefore being able to tell stories from my own life, or just sort of re-articulating stuff that's going on in the world through the frameworks is incredibly important, because it's only through the power of stories that people connect and emote and feel and trust. I think that's it really for me in terms of why
I mean, you are exceptional in that you do deliver the odd program, and it's good that you turn up when they're, so that you're saying to everybody, this isn't just something we do, tick the box, you've been on the program, this is how we live and breathe, this is how we operate here in every which way. And I think that's so incredibly powerful. One of the things I'd be curious about, because as you know, I believe that leadership is part of every minute of every day of your life. What impact has it had the way you bring up your daughter, who is lovely, by the way? She's a proper little character.
She's a hurricane. Her name is Harry, and I call her the Hurricane because she's just, she's hilarious. So it's interesting in that there's clearly an impact on her, but there's an impact on me as well. And it is worth saying, and I'm not remotely sort of closed or protective about this knowledge, is that it's an interesting situation with me and my daughter. She's turning 14 next week, and since the age of 5, she hasn't lived with me. So I divorced my husband, and he was primary caregiver, and so we continued with that, and he is primary caregiver for Harriet now, and I have her every other weekend and holidays, and so the relationship is different, and so it has helped me deal with all of that complexity. So just the living, breathing practice of leadership has helped me deal with that quite complex, often emotional, very confronting situation that is a journey. It's a confronting situation that doesn't go away. And there's more than me and Harry involved in it. There's, my ex-husband and his new family situation because he's remarried. So it helps me deal with that. And there's all sorts of tools of leadership that help me with that, notwithstanding communicating behavior, responsibility model, stimulus response I use on a regular basis, the ability to choose your battle. So it's not necessarily just about the direct relationship, me and Harry. It's my ability to overall lead in that situation as best I possibly can. But of course, that indirectly impacts her in as positive a way as it can be. And then directly, it's interesting. So, of course, I practice leadership in every which way I possibly can. And with children, it is really interesting, for sure, particularly in terms of appreciation, listening, and asking great questions. Now, I hate giving advice generally in life. I find it really awkward to think that I might be important enough to advise somebody on a situation. And generally in leadership practice anyway, you should help somebody find their own solution such that they own it better, they believe it, they feel empowered by their own solution. And that is very much the approach that I'll take with Harry. But the interesting thing about Harry compared to a working environment situation, and particularly given that you're not the parent she's with all the time, is she's come to expect, when she wants an answer, she wants an answer. Whereas I'm very much, well, if you could imagine a world in which this were true, how would you then approach it? Or what do you think, darling? Or, and sometimes it just gets to the point. I had one last weekend where she's just like, will you just stop playing this game and just tell me? So I have to choose my moments, because sometimes she really likes to deep it and have a deep conversation about something and let me ask my questions, and and sometimes, because of the way that her other relationships with her other parents are, she just wants to be told, and I'm not very good at reading when it is. She just tell me the answer, mummy. I don't want to discuss it. Stop playing your game.
It is interesting, because, and it is, I look back, as you know, that I'm very sad I didn't learn this until the age of at 50 when all my children basically had grown up. And I look back and it saddens me no end that basically I managed them. I didn't lead them. I loved them so much. I never stopped giving them advice. I never stopped trying to tell them what to do so they didn't fall into the pitfalls that I fell into, through love and not knowing. That's what I did. And seeing the way Emma brings up Grace is just really amazing. It's a different ball game completely. And for me, that was a really powerful lesson. And I think that seeing Grace now, she is fiercely independent and it's amazing, in a good way. She's independent in a good way. And it is really amazing to see it. And I look back and I think, God, and this is the sad thing, Sophie. I still find it difficult not to give advice. I still find it difficult. Would I ever lose that? Because you never stop caring, you never stop wanting to give advice. But of course, you've got the interesting scenario that you've got her on one side being given advice all the time through love, but being given advice all the time, and you desperately wanting her to take responsibility for herself. And so she's got this dynamic going on. I do think your daughter's lovely, by the way. I think Harry's absolutely gorgeous. And I would have described her as fiercely independent, even when I met her the last time, which is a couple of years ago.
For sure. When she was running ragged your dogs around your garden and asking you for sweets and things. Absolutely. There's a phrase in the Northeast. And although Harry was born on the South Coast, I was brought up in the Northeast. And the phrase in the Northeast is shy Ben's getting out. And she definitely is not shy when there's something that she wants to lay her hands on, that's for sure. But I should say, Pen, it's a great reflection of yours, absolutely, on Emma and Grace. But I should also say that it's great credit to you that you are, humble enough to see that in action and appreciate it for what it is. Because I think it is challenging for with some parenting styles when you have the grandparent dynamic as well. And there's the way we did it and the way you're doing it, and it can be quite confronting and quite difficult, particularly for the grandchild in the mix, because mummy deals with me like this, but then somebody of a different generation will pile in and be actually quite frustrated about, well, this isn't happening very quickly and I just need this to happen. Why are we discussing it and talking about the merits of it? And so it's only doable when there's consistency, if you like. To your point about my situation, but also, Emma and Grace's situation with you.
Yeah. So next time you're calling by and you've got Harry with you, you have to call in. So that it's ages since I've seen her. I'd love to see her again. There aren't quite so many dogs to play with, but there's 2 young ones that she'd love to play with.
Oh, you'd be terrified, Penny. She's almost as tall as me now.
Oh, is she really? Wow.
Yeah, which is I'm not very tall. I'm pocket sized, but yeah. She's pretty much a woman now.
Wow, it's scary. It all happens too quickly. Yeah. All happens too quickly.
Very quickly.
Now, Sophie, as you know, I think that what you've achieved over the last few years has been nothing short of miraculous, and that's seconded by Paul Stobart, by Kevin Parker. They just all think you're amazing. But it probably won't be too long before you're going to be headhunted out and it's time for you to move on. And the thing I have to say that I think is amazing about you is that you have developed a company that it's not one that's going to fall apart the minute you go. You've developed them all so brilliantly that I don't mean this, but they almost don't need you. They can now do it and move on. And that's the biggest gift that you could have possibly given. But if you now knew that you could choose I was going to say the biggest opportunity, but it's not that, but something that would really light your fire for you to move on to, what would you like to move on to if you could?
Oh, Penny, what a question. And you'll know, because you know me, that I don't have a clear answer. Because I have this view, and I think it's going to sound really trite now, so just forgive me for being a little bit trite. I have this phrase about my life, which is just water finds its way. There's a direction, but not a clear path, and water just finds its way. And somehow, over the course of my career, when I've just found my way, and I've never had a plan. And I'm the most disappointing person to talk to, particularly when women want to know, but you're a woman chief executive, you're a chief executive in your 30s. How did you do it? What was your plan? How can I what's the secret sauce that I can then follow? And I'm like, I didn't have a plan. I don't know. I just, it all just happened. It's just a story of my life. And so the short answer is I don't know. But what I do know, I have, over the course of this brilliant journey with TF, which is far from over, we've got an awful lot more work to do here, is that I've been able to sort of try and articulate, because you have to be able to, as a leader, try and articulate what is your role in any given scenario. So people talk quite tritely about my purpose in life and what have you. That doesn't really work for me. But what does work for me is know what would be my role in any given scenario. And that's sort of like my steer, either in like day-to-day, hour-to-hour situations, or in life generally, or in my industry generally. And that is what I enjoy doing, and what I think my role is to expand the debate and expand people's thinking. And so whatever happens for me next, I know that will be my role in that career option, that I will aim, my role will be to expand the thinking and expand the debate beyond what people are thinking in the here and now. And that, unfortunately, Pen, is the best way I can answer. But hopefully it's helpful for anybody that's watching, listening now, or post.
And do you think being in the same industry is important to you, or would you be happy to look at any industry? Do you think that all the gifts that you could bring to people with your deep understanding of leadership and getting the best out of people, do you think that you need to stay in that industry, or you could move to any other industry?
No, and I think that's the wonderful thing. I've been in this sector for a long time, and I should say that it's a sector that I'm very passionate about, because I think it needs a lot of disruption. There's a chance to do some real good for people in the entry level of their careers and really reinvent the sector for what it is. But to answer your question, could I move sectors? Yes, absolutely. And I'm very agnostic about it. But the reason it's important to understand this in the context of leadership is what I have learned is that if you truly, and I was talking earlier about truly feeling and intuiting the practice of leadership such that it just becomes part of your natural style, then you can kind of lead any organization, because it's not about you and you don't have to have the answers. It's actually just about sort of building the right team and engaging them and forging the path together. And so the pressure of being the industry expert, which is what the chief executive should be, it's what you're appointed for. Well, you are the sector expert in the room. All of that pressure is sort of gone. So I am confident that I could walk into a different sector. I like that it was one that I was excited about, but I could walk into a different sector and be able to lead it, if that makes sense.
I'm really glad to hear you say that, because I actually agree with you. I think that too many chief executive roles people step into thinking they need to know the industry inside out and upside down. But to my thinking, if you're a real leader, you can step into any industry, because it's not about knowing the industry. It's about how do you work with the people to help them become the best they can be in whatever way.
And they will know the industry. They will know it. And, you can learn an industry anyway. You can learn that on the way.
Yeah. So, Sophie, can you believe we've had an hour go?
I think I haven't said any swear words, and I think I've sort of made sense, even though we didn't have a plan. So I'm winning all day long. All I've got to do now is win getting to the station for my train, and I'll be happy days.
I know. Just to tell you, we haven't had questions. We've had comments. Tash, who's saying you're brilliant, Sophie. Max Hopkinson saying this is so good. Rob Wood, super. Rob Wood's super helpful story. Thank you, Sophie and Penny. Angie Morris, thanks for sharing your story, Sophie. Loved hearing your approach to people and team performance together. So I think once this is up on LinkedIn, I think there'll be a lot more. I do just need to ask you one question. If there are some people who decide that they want to be able to email you and ask you anything directly, are you happy for that to happen?
Yeah, of course.
So are you happy if we put your email address up so that if people do want to contact and ask you a question, are you happy for that to happen?
Yeah, that's no worries at all. They've just got to be clear about what it is in the subject line so that it doesn't get caught in one of our massive firewalls.
I know, Sophie, thank you. As always, it's an absolute joy to talk to you. I think you are the most amazing example of outstanding leadership. And I wish that more and more people could learn exactly how you do it and how you bring the best out of people. To have been able to turn a company around, keeping the large majority of the key people in it, hardly losing anybody, but having had those people who had been run down and all told how bad they were, and you've turned it round, a success of the company by working with the people differently, is an accolade that is truly amazing. So you're a very special lady, and you're an absolute example of everything we teach. Thank you, sweetheart.
No worries. You're absolutely welcome. And while I'll take the tummy tickle, I take a great deal of inspiration from the team here. It's the fuel to the fire, and a great deal of inspiration from you and your team, and some wonderful humans that I've met along the way, including Max, who was one of the lovely commenters there, who inspires me to do better every day as well. So I take inspiration from other people, yourself included. So take a tummy tickle right back.
Thank you, sweetheart.
No worries. You're most welcome.